Fritzl's case emerged in April 2008 when a 42-year-old woman, Elisabeth Fritzl, told police in the town of Amstetten, Austria, that she had been held captive for 24 years in a concealed corridor part of the basement area of the large family house by her father, Josef Fritzl, and that Fritzl had physically assaulted, sexually abused, and raped her numerous times during her imprisonment. The abuse by her father resulted in the birth of 7 children and 1 miscarriage. 4 of the children joined their mother in captivity, and 3 were raised by Josef and his wife Rosemary Fritzl and reported as foundlings. It had seemed an innocent enough request. Could Elisabeth help her father hoist the door into its frame? Elisabeth Fritzl followed her father down into the bowels of the cellar that he had been building for months in the garden beneath the family home. It was a hot day in August 1984, a month in which Prince released his hit Purple Rain, the space shuttle Discovery took off on its maiden voyage, and the country of Upper Volta changed its name to Burkina Faso. Elisabeth climbed down the stairs into the cellar and helped him fix the door in the dusty compounds of his underground creation. As she turned to leave, a piece of cloth soaked in ether was held over her mouth and nose, and her world went dark, possibly forever. It was a deeply cruel start to an unbelievably cruel deed. How could Elisabeth have known that she was helping her own father install the final building block to his plans to lock her up as his sex slave? Fritzl had been planning what was effectively a dungeon for years, receiving official permission to construct his cellar complex as far back as the late 1970s. It was not difficult to get officials to approve underground constructions. It was at the height of the Cold War, and this, after all, was Lower Austria, which during those tense and heated days in world affairs found itself on the frontier with the Soviet Union. Nuclear bunkers were seen as an even more normal and necessary addition to an Austrian home than a conservatory or a kitchen extension might be viewed in Britain. The local council had even given him a grant of a couple £1,000 towards the building costs. Neighbors had observed with some intrigue as the electrical engineer hired a digger which sat in his garden in the tidy town of Amstetten for months. They watched as he tossed tons of earth from beneath the house and shifted it in a wheelbarrow to make way for the rooms he planned to build. A precise planner, he had thought of every last detail, securing concrete and steel supplies through contacts at construction companies where he had previously worked. There were initially 2 access points, a heavy hinged door and a metal door reinforced with concrete operable via a remote control device. A total of 8 doors had to be opened before reaching the purpose-built cellar. The final door before the darkness of the tomb-like cellar was the one that Elisabeth herself unwittingly helped him to install. It was easy enough to instigate. Elisabeth had threatened to run away many times. More than once she had been hauled back to the family home by the police, or her father, once getting as far as the big city, Vienna, with a girlfriend. So when Elisabeth disappeared from one day to the next, he told friends and family she had run off to join a sect. They all believed him. In reality, she was living under their feet, beneath the garden where he and the rest of the family enjoyed barbecues in the summer. Years later, when he expanded the underground accommodation, he built a swimming pool upstairs as a cover-up for the amount of earth he was having to drag up. Later, when they splashed into the pool, the family did so above Elisabeth's prison. Over the next 24 years, the horror for Elisabeth was unrelenting. The cold, the damp, the rats, which she was sometimes forced to catch with her bare hands. The water that ran off the walls in such large quantities, she had to use towels to soak it up. Summer, when the place turned into an intolerable sweaty sauna, was the worst time of the year, she would later write in the calendar. During all of these years that she was in captive, we had these things happen. Chernobyl's nuclear reactor blew up. DNA testing first came into use to convict criminals. The Berlin Wall fell. The release of Nelson Mandela. The LA riots after the beating of Rodney King. O.J. Simpson was arrested for murder. Diana, Princess of Wales, died. The euro was introduced. Mad cow disease. A tsunami devastated Asia, not to mention all the inventions and technological developments from the mobile phone to the internet. For everyone else, the world kept on spinning, while Elisabeth stood still and stagnant. At first, Fritzl strapped Elisabeth's arms and then tied them behind her back with an iron chain, which he then secured to metal posts behind her bed. She could only move approximately half a meter either side of the bed. After 2 days, he gave her more freedom of movement by attaching the chain around her waist. Then, about 6 to 9 months into imprisonment, he removed the metal chain because it was hindering his sexual activity with his daughter. He sexually abused and raped her sometimes several times a day, from the second day of her incarceration right up until her release in April 2008. Over the course of nearly a quarter of a century, he would rape her at least 3,000 times, resulting in 7 babies, who themselves often had to watch the abuse as they grew older. 3 of these children were to stay underground, never seeing daylight until their release in April 2008. 3 others mysteriously appeared on the doorstep of Fritzl and his wife Rosemary in their home in Amstetten, west of Vienna, abandoned, so Fritzl told the community, by Elisabeth, who had delivered them to him and Rosemary from her sect to be brought up as the Fritzl's own, and all without arousing Rosemary's suspicion or those of the Austrian authorities. Fritzl's dictated letters to Rosemary, which she supposedly wrote from her prison. He then sometimes drove miles in his cars to post them back to his wife, Rosemary. In them, Elisabeth explained that she was well, but could not look after the children. In reality, she was torn at being separated from her children, but happy that her upstairs offspring would at least have a better life than those languishing downstairs. One of the children, a twin called Michael, died shortly after his birth in the cellar in 1996. He had severe breathing difficulties and died in his mother's arms when he was just 66 hours old. Fritzl admitted he subsequently burned the baby's body in an incinerator, but until his admission during his trial this week, he always denied that he was responsible for murder through negligence. He said, "I don't know why I didn't help. I just overlooked it. I thought the little one would survive." Until Wednesday, Fritzl had also denied enslavement. His lawyer, Rudolf Meyer, tried to explain Fritzl's decision to imprison his daughter and force her to submit to his every whim as the act of a devoted father. Fritzl's original defense for how it all began was that Elisabeth was a wayward child and that he was only trying to protect her by locking her away from the outside world. Drugs, drink, and bad company had threatened to drag her down, he argued. His lawyer tried to paint him as a caring man who spent time and money maintaining both of his families. He even took a Christmas tree down into the dungeon, said Mayer, and school books, an aquarium, even a cannery. In what now seems like a sick joke, he said that the cannery's ability to survive was proof that the air in the cellar could not have been that bad after all. Throughout her captivity, he repeatedly threatened Elisabeth by saying, "If you do not do as I say, your treatment will get worse, and you will not escape from this cellar anyway." He repeatedly beat and kicked her. He also subjected her to humiliating sexual abuse, including forcing her to reenact scenes from violent pornographic films. The abuse left her with serious lasting physical injuries and psychological damage. She spent the first 5 years entirely alone. He hardly ever spoke to her. Then the babies started to come. They were a horror for her, but they also provided her with longed-for company and a purpose to live after years in which she had contemplated suicide. The births over 12 years all took place without any medical help. To prepare for them, her father provided her with disinfectant, a dirty pair of scissors, and a 1960s book on childbirth. Fritzl often threatened Elisabeth and her children, warning them that if they tried to escape, they would be killed. He told them he had installed a system so that the doors would give them an electric shock if they tried to open them, and that poison would be released into the cellar if they tried to escape, killing them all instantly. He would punish her by switching off all the power to the cellar for days at a time, so she was left alone in total darkness. She cried as the freezer he later installed so that he could go stockpile food while he went away on holiday defrosted and leaked its contents on the floor of her already horrendously damp prison. The end of her ordeal came in April of 2008 when Kirsten, her 19-year-old daughter, became gravely ill. Fritzl, not known for his mercy in the past, put her in his Mercedes and drove her to the hospital. There, the doctors became deeply suspicious of the deadly pale creature with bad teeth who lay dying in intensive care. Repeated media appeals were broadcast for the mother to come forward with information that was necessary if they were going to have any chance of saving her life. Elisabeth and her two boys viewed the appeals on the television in their cellar. She pleaded with her father to let her out. His powers waning, his ability to keep two families sustained reducing by the days as he aged and his heart grew weaker. He had already begun to hatch a plan as to how he could release his daughter without too many questions being asked. He relented perhaps for the first time ever. He told the hospital the family had appeared on his doorstep, having escaped from their sect. But the doctors and police did not believe his story this time around. At the hospital, Elisabeth was whisked into a room away from her father, where police threatened to charge her with child abuse because of the way she had clearly neglected her daughter. Elisabeth then said she had a completely different tale from the one they expected to hear. She would start to tell them only on condition they promised her she would never have to set eyes on her father again. For a few years now, Elisabeth and her children are living under new identities, which is understandable because the media was all over this like a fat kid on a cupcake. Also, they supposedly live in an undisclosed location under constant surveillance, so anyone who tries to go near them, if they find out where they live, will be picked up by police in minutes. Her father should be someone you can trust, just like you would expect from any parent. The things he did are insanely twisted. I can't even understand why anyone would feel like doing this, let alone doing it to your own child. On top of that, 24 years of isolation and never seeing the outside world is an extreme form of torture. I think I would feel depressed after a week of never being able to see the outside world. In fact, if I even keep the curtains closed for too long during the day, I would already start to feel less happy because I can't see the beautiful sky. Because of what Elisabeth and her children went through, most of them probably need help for the rest of their lives in order to build them back up mentally and physically. Even those kids that grew up in a cellar without ever seeing the outside world. What the fuck, man? Her dad, of course, is serving life in prison, so he'll be there until he's dead. Knowing that he was in his 70s when they arrested him, this will probably not take long. As always, dear viewer, have sweet dreams.